The wind bit hard that January morning, hissing through the broken boards of the Pigpen behind Henley's saloon. Evelyn Mercer huddled against the farthest corner, her dress caked with slop, her hair tangled like tumbleweed, and her pride buried somewhere beneath a crust of ice and pig shit. Her breath came out in white puffs, and her hands, swollen and red, curled against her ribs as if she could hold herself together. They hadn't even let her explain. Sheriff Harland had stood there in front of the whole damn town, Preacher Yates, old widow Connors, even little Nate from the feed store, while Lyle Durant shouted, "Whore!" and "Squaw lover!" Evelyn's mouth had gone dry, her eyes searching for mercy in faces that once greeted her with pie and letters and Sunday hymns. There was none, so they threw her here, behind the saloon with the slop buckets, with the hogs. Let her rot, Lyle said, and no one argued. 3 weeks ago, her husband Joseph had ridden out to trade with a Lakota hunting party near Eagle Creek. He never returned. The next morning, his horse limped back without a rider. By nightfall, Evelyn's homestead was in flames. When she was found, unconscious and half-naked, a group of drunk vigilantes whispered the worst, that she'd lain with a savage and let him kill her husband. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. Now, she was just another piece of rot in the corner of town. But the Lakota chief, Wicasa Wakan, was already riding in. The hoofbeats came slow and deliberate, a single rider against the wind. His buckskin coat was lined with fur, the fringe frozen stiff at the ends. Feathers moved slightly with each step of his stallion, black against the snow. He passed under the crude gate of the town without a word, flanked by 2 young warriors, but needing no introduction. The townsfolk quieted. Wicasa Wakan wasn't like the raiders they feared. He was a known speaker, a man who'd met with General Sully and once dined with a governor's aide, but to most here, he was still the enemy. Sheriff Harland met him outside the jailhouse, his stance half proud, half nervous. "Chief," he said stiffly, hat in hand, "we didn't expect you so soon." Wicasa Wakan said nothing at first. He looked around the town, the broken signs, the slanted buildings, the scared eyes. Then he spoke in low, firm English. "I come for words. And what was stolen?" Harland nodded. "You'll have them." He gestured toward the boarding house. "We prepared a place for you." But Wicasa didn't move. His gaze slid past the sheriff, past the crowd, until it landed on the Pigpen. There, hunched in the shadows, lay Evelyn, bare arms blue with cold, dress torn at the shoulder, eyes hollow as a prairie well. Without a word, Wicasa turned his horse and rode straight to her. Evelyn saw the hooves first, then the man. She tried to scramble back, the mud sucking at her legs, panic rushing in her chest. Another humiliation, she thought, but Wicasa didn't raise a hand. He didn't speak. He dismounted, slow and steady. The 2 warriors remained behind, watching with unreadable faces. The chief approached the pen gate and unlatched it. Silence spread through the crowd like frost. Then he stepped inside. Evelyn flinched. The stink of pigs rose around them. Wicasa crouched beside her, eyes level with hers. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I see the lies they put on you." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. He reached into his coat, pulled out a wool blanket, and draped it over her shoulders with surprising gentleness. "I see your heart," he said. "You were not taken. You were left." A tear slipped down Evelyn's cheek before she could stop it. Then he did the unthinkable. He sat, right there in the mud, next to her. People gasped. A few backed away. Harland looked like he'd been struck with a hammer. Wicasa turned to the crowd, voice now sharp and certain. "She is my Thawi, my wife. From this day, you shame her, you shame me." No one moved. Evelyn's breath caught. She stared at the man beside her, tall, proud, unshaken, not a rescuer, not a savior, a partner. And for the first time in weeks, warmth touched her bones, not from the blanket, but from the fire he'd lit in their eyes. The saloon's doors banged open as Sheriff Harland stormed through, his fists clenched and jaw grinding. The whole damn town had seen it. Wicasa Wakan, chief of the Oglala, sitting in pig slop beside a white woman they'd condemned, and worse, claiming her, calling her his wife. Inside, Lyle Durant slammed his whiskey glass on the bar. "You gonna let that red bastard shame us all?" he barked. Harland said nothing for a long time. Then, "We'll talk, once he's done with his ceremony." "Ceremony? Hell, he's mocking us," Lyle spat. "She's filth and he's—" Harland held up a hand. "Let me handle it." But the words tasted like ash. Harland had fought at Sand Creek. He'd seen what happened when men pushed too far. And if Wicasa Wakan meant what he said, things were about to get real complicated. Wicasa Wakan guided Evelyn gently from the pen. The blanket clung to her shoulders, still damp from the cold, but her spine straightened with each step. The townsfolk parted like water around them, silent, angry, confused. At the edge of town, the chief paused beside his horse. "I will not make you go," he said in English, "but I will not leave you behind." Evelyn stared up at him, trying to make sense of her own trembling. Her voice came out hoarse. "Why?" He looked toward the ridge where the wind was breaking the snow. "Because I know what it is to be hated for surviving." She hesitated. Then she climbed into the saddle behind him. The Lakota camp lay an hour's ride north, nestled in a curve of the Bad River. Tents of tanned hide, smoke rising from lodge fires, children wrapped in rabbit fur, playing near the edge. When Wicasa rode in with Evelyn behind him, all movement stilled. Eyes followed them, some wide with surprise, others narrowed with wariness. An old woman approached, her grey braids long and stiff with ice. She looked at Evelyn, then spoke in Lakota. Wicasa replied calmly, his tone firm. Evelyn caught only one word she recognized. "Thawi, wife." The woman nodded, slow and grim. Evelyn was taken to a lodge near the central fire. Inside, warmth enveloped her. Pine boughs lining the floor, dried meat hanging in bundles, the crackle of firewood. She sat near the flames while Wicasa knelt beside her. "They will watch," he said. "Some will not trust. But no one will harm you here." Evelyn met his eyes. "You don't even know me." "I saw you in the snow," he said. "No one spoke for you, that is all I needed." She looked down at her hands, raw, bloodied, not from battle, but from being discarded. "I don't know how to be anyone's wife anymore," she whispered. He reached out, placing his palm gently over hers. "Then we will learn together." That night, she slept on a bed of warm furs, the wind howling outside like a bitter ghost. In her dreams, she saw Joseph, his face twisted in anger, not love. She remembered how his voice had turned to slurs when the whiskey flowed, how she'd flinched at shadows, how he'd gone to trade alone because he refused to take a woman who gets too curious about the neighbors. And in the dream, Joseph disappeared into fire, and Wicasa stood in his place, silent, steady, eyes full of the prairie sky. When she woke, her cheeks were wet with tears. By mid-morning, trouble rode in. 2 riders approached the Lakota camp at speed, one waving a white cloth, the other armed with a rifle. Wicasa stepped out to meet them. Evelyn stood behind the flap of the lodge, watching. It was Harland and Lyle Durant. Harland raised his hand. "We came to talk." Wicasa nodded once. "Then speak." Harland looked past him, eyes finding Evelyn. His face twisted. "You can't keep her." Wicasa folded his arms. "She chose." "She's white," Lyle snapped. "She's ours." Wicasa's gaze turned sharp. "She was yours, and you fed her to the pigs." Evelyn stepped into view. "I choose to stay," she said, voice shaking. Lyle spat at the snow. "Then you're no better than him." Harland narrowed his eyes. "If she stays, it'll break what little peace we have." "Then your peace is weak," Wicasa replied. The men left, but not before Lyle muttered loud enough for all to hear. "She'll burn with him when the war comes." That evening, Evelyn sat beside the central fire, surrounded by quiet stares and the distant beat of drums. Wicasa handed her a carved wooden bowl of soup, then sat beside her. "You can leave any time," he said softly. "But if you stay, the path will not be easy." Evelyn looked into the fire. "I have nowhere else to go, and I don't want to be alone." He nodded, a slow smile flickering across his lips. "Then we faced the storm together." Outside the lodge, snow began to fall again, heavy and endless, as if trying to cover everything broken. But Evelyn no longer felt buried. The wind came down hard from the north, bringing with it a cold that whispered of war. Evelyn had been living in the Lakota camp for 8 days when she noticed how silence had settled over it, not peaceful, but tense, watchful. The laughter of children had dulled. The hunters returned early and unspeaking. The elders sat longer by the fire, murmuring in tones that made Evelyn's skin prickle. Something was coming, and it wore the face of the white man. At dawn, Wicasa Wakan met with 4 village elders beneath the council lodge. Evelyn stood just outside, straining to hear without intruding. Inside, the voices grew heated, words in Lakota sharp with fear and fury. Names were spoken: Fort Laramie, General Thorne, Broken Rock. Later, Wicasa returned to her with his jaw tight. "They've sent word. The army marches. General Thorne blames us for a raid on settlers near the Black Hills." Evelyn's stomach knotted. "But that wasn't—" "I know," he said, "but he wants someone to blame. And they think this," he gestured to her, then to himself, "proves we've taken their women." Evelyn backed away, stunned. "They think I was stolen? They think I shamed them, that you shamed them." Her eyes brimmed. "What will they do?" Wicasa looked toward the smoke on the horizon. "If they cross into our lands, we fight, but I will not let them take you." That evening, Evelyn sat with the women, learning to grind dried choke cherries into pemmican paste, her fingers clumsy, her eyes distracted. A girl named Suni leaned closer. "You still fear us?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not fear. I just don't know where I belong." Suni nodded solemnly. "You are between rivers, not on one bank, not on the other. But where does that leave me?" The girl smiled faintly. "Sometimes between rivers is where the strongest bridges are built." The next day, word reached the camp that 2 Lakota scouts had not returned. Wicasa called for a council. "I will ride to the fort," he told them. "I will speak with Thorn before he spills blood." Cries of dissent rang out. "White men listen only to guns. They lie with every breath." But Wicasa raised his hand. "If we do not speak first, there will be no chance to speak after." Then turning to Evelyn, he said, "I want you to come." Gasps rose from the circle. She stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because your face is the mirror they fear," he said, "and the proof they can't ignore." They rode the next morning, a cold wind in their faces, 7 strong. Wicasa, Evelyn, 4 trusted warriors, and an old interpreter named Red Elk. The army fort loomed ahead by dusk, stone walls casting long shadows over the plains. A line of soldiers met them at the gate, rifles raised, eyes hard. General Thorn appeared, his grey mustache thick and his coat spotless. "You bring her here?" he barked. "As a mockery." Wicasa dismounted, calm. "We bring words." "You bring treason," Thorn snapped. "That woman is a white citizen. Her place is with her kind." Evelyn stepped forward, voice clear. "My kind threw me to the pigs." Murmurs rippled among the soldiers. Thorn's face twisted. "This alliance, whatever it is, ends tonight. Return the woman, disband your camp, or we march." Wicasa's voice was like stone. "If you march, you will bleed. You threaten the United States Army?" "No, I warn it." That night, they made camp under a small bluff 5 miles from the fort. Evelyn sat by the fire, heart pounding. "You knew he wouldn't listen." Wicasa nodded. "He needed to see. That was all." "What now?" He looked into the flames. "Now we ready the children. The old ones. They must go north, you too." She gripped his sleeve. "No, I stay." He turned, surprised. "I've been discarded once," she said. "I won't run again." Silence passed between them, heavy with truth. Then he took her hand. "Then we stand together, no matter what comes." Far beyond them, in the dark of Thorn's war tent, a rider was dispatched to Dustwell, the same town that had condemned Evelyn. A message was scrawled and sealed. "We march at dawn, burn their homes, scatter their camp." The woman is to be recovered, alive or not. By the time the message reached Dustwell, Lyle Durant had already taken up arms. He read Thorn's order by lantern light inside the saloon, a fresh bottle of rye on the table. "Burn their homes, scatter their camp," he read aloud, a twisted grin on his face. Ain't no clearer than that. Around him, a half-dozen townsmen muttered and loaded their rifles. They were butchers, drunkards, and farmers, but now they fancied themselves soldiers. Vengeance lit their eyes more than duty. "She's with them now," one of them said. "She made her choice." Lyle spat. "Then she dies, like one of them." In the Lakota camp, preparations had begun with quiet precision. Wicasa Wakan stood at the center, issuing instructions in clipped Lakota. Elders gathered children and packed what they could onto travois and ponies. Smoke rose as women buried sacred items beneath earth that might soon burn. Evelyn helped Suni and 2 older women pack blankets and dried roots into bundles. Her hands no longer trembled. Her eyes were steady. "You must go with them," Wicasa said as he approached her. "They ride tonight, north, to safer ground." "I already told you," she said. "I'm not leaving." He looked at her, truly looked. She was pale, frostbitten on one cheek, hair tangled and dull, but she stood taller than she ever had before. "Then you will not leave my side," he said softly. "No matter what." At dusk the evacuation began. Dozens moved like ghosts between trees, careful to avoid the river trail where soldiers might appear. By the time the moon rose, the camp was nearly silent. Only a dozen warriors remained, and Evelyn. They dug trenches, laid brush traps, prepared the few rifles they had. Evelyn was handed a revolver, her husband's, recovered from the ashes of their home. She held it without ceremony. Wicasa stood beside her, arms crossed. "They come at dawn," he said. She nodded. "I used to think I was just a farmer's wife," she said. "Then a widow, then a disgrace." He looked at her. "And now?" She turned to him, voice hard with resolve. "Now I'm something they can't define." The sun rose like a blade of fire over the ridge, and with it came the storm. Dustwell's posse arrived first, Lyle Durant in front, waving a makeshift banner as if it were war. Behind them the army followed, rows of blue coats, glinting rifles, and the thunder of hooves. They didn't stop to parley. The first shots rang out as they crested the ridge. Warriors on the edge of the camp opened fire, dropping 2 Dustwell men before they even saw the campfires. Smoke exploded from rifle barrels. Screams echoed. Evelyn fired twice, missing once, hitting a soldier square in the shoulder the second time. She didn't flinch. Then Wicasa fell. A bullet struck his side as he pushed an elder out of the way. He stumbled, blood blooming across his shirt like fire in snow. Evelyn screamed. She ran to him, pulling him behind a felled log as bullets tore the air. "Stay down!" she cried. He gritted his teeth, pale but conscious. They won't stop. And they didn't, until a horn blew, not from the army, but from the north. The Lakota who had fled returned, not as refugees, but as reinforcements. They came down the bluff with war cries, rifles raised, bows drawn. In minutes the battle turned. Dustwell's men broke first, scattering, stumbling over each other in the snow. Then Thorne's soldiers, seeing their flank exposed, began to retreat. Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, mud on her hands, blood on her coat, eyes blazing with something deeper than fury, something like purpose. The fighting lasted less than half an hour. When the smoke cleared, 12 white men lay dead. 5 Lakota, including one boy barely 15. Thorne was nowhere to be found. Rumor later placed him miles away, rewriting the battle report to frame the Lakota as aggressors. Lyle Durant had not fled. He was found beneath a tree, throat slashed, not by a blade but by his own rifle turned against him. Evelyn said nothing when they told her. Wicasa was still breathing, though pale and weak. She stayed at his side all night, pressing snow against his wound, whispering stories about her childhood and the first spring flowers on the edge of the farm. By the third day the camp stirred again. Wicasa sat upright beside the fire, his voice stronger. "You kept your word," he said. Evelyn nodded. "So did you." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then we build," he said, "from ashes." And around them the camp began to rise again. New fires, new tents, new hope. Not because they'd won, but because they hadn't surrendered. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slowly across the plains, revealing a land pocked with scorch marks, trampled grass, and graves marked by stones and wooden stakes. But even in the scars, life returned. The Lakota camp had moved upriver, farther into the shelter of the hills. There, beneath budding cottonwoods, a new village took root. Tents rose with fresh hides. Children ran barefoot through wet soil. The sound of drums returned to the evening winds. And Evelyn remained. Wicasa healed slowly. The bullet had passed near his ribs, too close to his lung. For weeks he moved only with help, and every breath was a battle. But he did not complain. Evelyn sat beside him every day, feeding him, changing his bandages, learning his language, word by word. She no longer felt like a guest. She belonged. Even the older women, who had once eyed her with wary glances, now nodded when she passed or left wild herbs by her door. Suni braided her hair with bits of turquoise. Young boys asked to hear stories from her world, about trains, about books, about the sound of piano keys. She gave them what she could, but she never spoke of Dustwell. One quiet morning, as mist drifted off the river, Wicasa stood beside her beneath the bare branches of an old oak. "There will be no return," he said. Evelyn looked up at him. He nodded toward the east. "The soldiers won't forget. They will come again. Maybe not soon, but they always come." She swallowed. "Then we prepare." He took her hand. "And we live." A council was called 2 weeks later. Not just the Oglala, but Miniconjou, Brule, even a few Arapaho. Messengers had passed word. A new treaty was being drafted by Washington agents, one that promised land but demanded silence. Wicasa rose before the fire and spoke. "We have heard their words before," he said. "We have signed their treaties and they tear them like leaves in wind. But this time," he added, voice quiet but fierce, "we hold something they do not understand. A woman they tried to destroy, and she still stands. Evelyn stepped forward. The camp fell silent. I was born on their side of the river, she said, but they tried to drown me. You pulled me out. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of dozens of warriors and elders. I am not Lakota by blood, but I am Lakota by choice, and I will raise my voice and any children I bear on this side of the water. No one spoke for a long time. Then the oldest man in the circle nodded once. So be it. That summer, Evelyn and Wicasa were wed again, this time not just by word but by rite. There was no white gown, no church, only feathers and bone and paint. She wore a dress stitched by Suni's mother, dyed red with crushed berries, trimmed with beads from Wyoming traders. He wore a shirt embroidered with his mother's quill work, a single eagle feather in his hair. They stood beneath a sky wide as memory, surrounded by those who once doubted, once feared, now clapped and laughed and danced around the fire. When Wicasa looked at her and whispered, "Thawi," she didn't just hear wife, she heard home. Years passed. The town of Dustwell shrank under the weight of its own bitterness. The saloon closed. The church burned in a lightning storm. Those who remained spoke rarely of Evelyn Mercer, except to say that she'd been claimed by the wilderness. But up north, on a hill beside the river, a small stone house stood beside a circle of teepees. It bore a carved plank above the door, "Between Rivers." And on the porch, an aging Lakota chief sat beside a pale-haired woman with laugh lines around her eyes and hands, like braided rope. Sometimes they told stories. Sometimes they just sat in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been lived.